my throat. To get just right for this. Happy World Poetry Day, everybody. I was originally going to read you guys a really cool love poem by Agatha Christie. She wrote about her husband who was an archaeologist, but then I realized that copyright is a real thing. So I picked something that was a little bit older, that's now public domain, and it actually has a really cool story behind it. It's archaeologically inspired and based, so it works really well for this, and I hope you guys really like it. So I'm going to read out for you and discuss the really cool poem called Ozymandias by Percy B. Shelley. Shelley himself was an English romantic poet, and he was kind of known as a rebel and a revolutionary of his time. And Ozymandias, one of his most famous poems, was published first in the January edition of the Examiner in 1818. If you're not sure who Ozymandias is and you're really confused by that name, it's actually the Greek term for Ramses II or Ramses the Great. The name itself was taken from a description written by Diodorus Siculus. He's a classic author. He wrote the Historica Bibliotheca, which was about 40 issues long. And one of the books mentions a Theban monument with a description about Ramses II. And it states, "I am Ozymandias, king of kings. If any would know how great I am and where I lie, let him excel in any of my works." It's a little boastful, but Ramses II, as you probably know, was pretty great. Other than King Tut, this is the guy that you probably know the most about from ancient Egypt. He was the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty and is often regarded as one of the most powerful rulers of ancient Egypt. But you probably know him as the guy that fathered 100 children and has that big schnoz. The poem itself was written in 1817 as part of a competition between he and Horace Smith. The story goes that Horace was staying over at his house in Marlow over Christmas between the 26th and the 28th of December that year, and talk about Diodorus and Egypt had come up, and the phrase King of Kings was very commonplace among romantic writers because it's a romantic phrase, guys. You know, King of Kings, like how powerful is that? So they started talking about this, and they kind of came up with this family-friendly competition to each write a poem about the King of Kings. It's thought that this whole conversation and subsequent competition came up due to an announcement of the British Museum in 1816 of their acquisition of this fragment of a statue of Ramses II that was found in Thebes or Luxor by the great Belzoni, who is one of my favorite archaeologists of all time. The statue itself was reportedly on its way to England, even though it didn't actually get there until about 1821. Shelley himself had never set foot in Egypt, and people at the time had no clue about all these fates of Ramses II. They only had a few references of him from the Bible under his Hebrew name. But Shelley was a romantic, and like all romantics, possessed an amazing imagination and this feeling of wonderment for things far away and mystical. So let's get into some actual poetry, you guys. So I'm going to read Percy Shelley's version first, the more famous of the two, and then I will read the Horace Smith version, and then we'll talk about the two of them. So this is Percy Shelley's version of Ozymandias. "I met a traveler from an antique land who said 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survived, stamped on those lifeless things the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, king of kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level stands stretched far away." This is Horace's version. "In Egypt's sandy silence, all alone, stands a gigantic leg, which far off throws the only shadow that the desert knows. I am great Ozymandias, saith the stone. The king of kings, this mighty city shows the wonders of my hand. The city's gone, none but the leg remaining to disclose the site of this forgotten Babylon. We wonder, and some hunter may express wonder like ours, when thro' the wilderness where London stood, holding the wolf in chase, he meets some fragment huge and stop to guess what powerful but unrecorded race once dwelt in that annihilated place." Now these are kind of sad and melancholic poems, as they both explore the ravages of time, the impermanence of history, and warn against pride and hubris of great leaders. They also point out the insignificance of human beings in history and the inevitable destruction of all things great. And it's not just for people of power or greatness. This can be applied and can stand for all pride and arrogance in all of humanity. They say the pen is mightier than the sword, and both Shelley and Smith kind of exemplify this here, showing that both art and literature greatly outlast any sort of empire or legacy of power. They take this claim of power and completely render it meaningless. Even Shelley's framing of the poem kind of makes us minimize the greatness even more, because we're adding an extra person, as he states that the story is being told to the author by a traveler from an antique land. It's adding an extra person in between the epitaph itself and the reader, trivializing it even more. So there are 2 poems for you for World Poetry Day. You can choose your favorite and then go and rock yourself to sleep in a corner knowing that anything you do in life will be forgotten and trivialized, and no matter what you do, if you build your empire, you ravage cities, you become this great human being, we're all going to forget about it one day. And on that depressing note, happy World Poetry Day. Stay dirty, my friends.